Hi everyone, I'm Emily and today I'm going to make a video all about how to disclose your autism diagnosis. There are lots of things to consider when you're deciding about disclosing your autism diagnosis. That includes who you're going to disclose it to, how you're going to do it, and whether you feel comfortable doing it at this time. I'm going to start with who do you disclose your autism diagnosis to? Now there are probably going to be lots of people around you, so that could be your family, your friends, people you work with, medical professionals, other people that you might be involved with, other services, and it's your decision as to whether you choose to disclose that diagnosis or not. It's also really important that you don't disclose your diagnosis until you are comfortable in doing so. From my own experience, I received my diagnosis in November of 2020, and at the time I only told a few people, including close family and a few of my friends. I kept this quiet for quite a long time, and it wasn't until February 2021 that I finally felt able to announce my autism diagnosis and disclose it to a wider range of people. Now I chose to do this through a Facebook post that was then really well received as people saw why I'd been struggling for as long as I had. And that was only 3 months. You don't have to wait as long as that, but it's also important to know that if you want to wait longer than that, that's perfectly okay as well. Now, I'm going to be honest and say that there is no guarantee that you will have a positive response from disclosing your autism diagnosis. I myself have had both positive and negative responses, so I know exactly just how brilliant it can feel when somebody accepts you for who you are, but also how difficult it can be when somebody doesn't quite see it in the way that it should be. So it really is important that you weigh up the pros and cons of whether or not to disclose your diagnosis. I'll go through how to do that in this next section. Now, to look at some of the pros to disclosing your autism diagnosis. Disclosing could mean that those around you understand why you've had certain struggles, why you need to do certain routines, why you have certain repetitive behaviours, potentially if you like to stim. It could also mean that in the workplace or in school that there are adjustments that will be able to be made available to you so that you can access the workplace or school environment in a much better way. It can also mean that it strengthens relationships, particularly if that understanding is there. If it's been a strained relationship because of not understanding why certain behaviours have happened, so that can actually be a huge benefit. I do also, on the other hand, have to notice that there are some negatives or potential cons to disclosing your autism diagnosis. Some people may be very understanding as to why you have to do certain behaviours, but there may be others that don't. And you may find that does actually cause some relationships to end. I will say that isn't always necessarily going to be a negative, because that does show that is something that could be a potential negative influence on you. It may also mean that there are some adjustments that are now not available to you in the workplace, as not all adjustments will be available. So that is something to take into consideration. Once you have gone through the pros and cons of disclosing your autism diagnosis, decided who it is that you want to disclose the diagnosis to, and made sure that you yourself are comfortable with your own diagnosis to be able to disclose it, the next thing to consider is how to do this. Now, I used a multiple number of methods to do this, from text messages to phone calls to a social media post in February of this year. Now, that was quite a public forum to announce my diagnosis, but for me, by that point, I was really proud of my diagnosis, and that helped reach people that had seen me struggle but maybe hadn't always accepted why, and for me answered their questions and was really accepting in their response. But I realise that may not be for everyone. So some of the other options you might want to consider is, how are you going to communicate? If you prefer written communication, you might prefer a text message, you might prefer an email or a letter, something that you can write down, consider, think it through, rather than trying to find the right words in that moment. Because remember, this is probably going to be quite an anxiety-provoking time to disclose as well. So it's really important that you are as comfortable as possible when making this disclosure. If you don't want to do the written method and you don't think it's personal enough, then maybe something like arrange to meet somebody for a walk, or if it's at work, arrange to have a meeting and to kind of explain that it's about an update in your life. It might help to maybe, if you would like that person to understand more about autism, to maybe make a few bullet points of how autism affects you, so that they can understand and have a little bit more of an understanding of how to support you as well. Take any of your own research, any of your own information if you feel that would be helpful, so that if they are interested, and I'm not saying everyone will be, but if people do want to learn more, then that shows that there's an open discussion that can happen there, that you're open to have with them if you are comfortable to do that. Now, it isn't just always with friends, family, or those at work that you may choose to disclose your autism diagnosis to. You may also feel that it might be beneficial to have a subtle way of showing that you may need extra support because you are autistic when you're out and about. So if you're on public transport, or if you're at a medical appointment, or in a shop, or a public attraction, something like that. And for me, that's kind of the sunflower lanyard, showing that I am autistic. So that's kind of another way of disclosure, without having to maybe verbalise it as well. So that is certainly an option to look into. So we've looked at all the build-up, we've looked at disclosing your diagnosis. What happens afterwards? Well, I kind of mentioned it earlier in the video about taking time for yourself. Absolutely. Disclosing your autism diagnosis may be a quite draining experience because you don't know how that person's going to react. You don't know how they're going to kind of respond to you. So make sure that you plan something for yourself afterwards. So that could be you go for a walk, it could be you listen to some music, you know, have a bit of a sensory break to be able to recharge, because at the end of the day, you are the most important person in this disclosure process. So I want to make sure that you are well supported. Now, I did mention talking about pros and cons. You may decide when you've gone through the pros and cons not to disclose your autism diagnosis. That is an absolutely fine decision if that works for you. It isn't public knowledge, it doesn't need to be public knowledge that you're autistic. It's your news, it's your information, and if you don't want to disclose it, that's absolutely fine.